Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Moran Show. The divisional round of the NFL playoffs has now come to an end. The Chiefs prevail. They will meet the Baltimore Ravens in the AFC Championship game. On the other side, the Niners beat the Packers. The Lions beat the Bucks. But on this show, I have John Tortorelli joining me because we're going to talk about Patrick Mahomes' GOAT case against Tom Brady. Can Mahomes catch Tom Brady? We're also going to talk about what's next for the Bills because they have a lot of free agents. 40% of the roster is a free agent, and the Falcons' next coaching hire, Belichick or Jim Harbaugh, some important coordinator hires like Ryan Nielson to the Jaguars and Shane Waldron to the Bears. And we're going to wrap things up by talking about the bigger mistake, Mike McCarthy being back in Dallas or Nick Sirianni being back in Philadelphia. John, how you doing?
I'm doing great. This is a loaded topic list. Great job, and really excited to be here.
It is a loaded topic list, John, and I can't start off this show without voicing to you how disappointed I was in you yesterday.
How what?
Being pure pressured by the group to turn your camera off while I'm listing some of the accolades and achievements that the greatest quarterback of this current generation is making right now. I mean, why disrespect him, John? What's wrong with you?
That wasn't peer pressure. I wanted the Bills to win. It's funny because I rooted for the Chiefs for a while. Cause my brother, for a long time, the Kansas City Chiefs were the Buffalo Bills. With Alex Smith, they're always good enough to win the AFC West when it stunk. But I like to see more teams get an opportunity to go to the Super Bowl. And to watch the Bills lose that game and to then hear the Mahomes praise, I was kind of tired of it with the rest of the guys. And ultimately, if they didn't turn their cameras off, I wouldn't have turned it off. But I absolutely had to because I didn't want to hear it.
Now, listen, John, I understand how you feel because that's how I felt about LeBron James in the NBA for a very long time. I wanted another team in the East to come out and maybe get a run for the championship. But now that I'm in different shoes and I'm a fan of the player that's doing the dominating, it's not that big of a deal for me. As long as the Jets aren't facing him, which the Jets are never in the position to have a concrete rivalry with Mahomes, it doesn't bother me. I used to watch football with my dad every Sunday. He moved to El Salvador, so I don't watch football with him anymore. But the one team that we would always watch was the Kansas City Chiefs, whether it was Alex Smith at quarterback first, and then that transition to Patrick Mahomes. We would watch all the playoff games together, so we would see a lot of Mahomes and the Chiefs. And at some point, you just start rooting for the player that you like watching the most, and that's Patrick Mahomes for me. And I think what he is doing is remarkable, and it is worth sharing. It is worth giving him his flowers because he's doing something that we might never see again in our lifetimes. 13 playoff wins right now, the most by a quarterback before turning 30 years old. 6 AFC championship games, 3 Super Bowl appearances, 2 Super Bowl wins in 6 seasons as a starter. And the question here really is can he pass Tom Brady? And I think he can. And I think if you're just looking at it from an eye test perspective, I think Patrick Mahomes is already better than Tom Brady. And if you compare their first 7 seasons amongst each other, it's pretty clear who the better player is. And I know most of what Brady's legacy is made out of his post 30s and post 40s. But Brady's first 7 seasons, 85.5 passer rating, 28 touchdowns, 15 interceptions, and 18 playoff games. Mahomes, first 7 seasons, and that's really first 6 seasons playing, same with Brady, 106.7 passer rating, 38 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 16 playoff games. So more touchdowns, less interceptions, and a better passer rating in less playoff games. And you compare the regular season games, Tom Brady 88.4 rating, 147 touchdowns to 78 interceptions in 96 games. Patrick Mahomes 103.5 passer rating, 219 touchdowns, 63 interceptions in 96 regular season games. I mean, all these numbers favor Mahomes. And I think if you're just kind of comparing them to their first 7 seasons, Mahomes clears. But right now, the trajectory Mahomes is going at, it is very likely he can be the best quarterback to ever play the game.
You make a great point. I believe, just like you, Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback we've seen, but it becomes a very multi-dimensional, discussion when it's greatness because it is only a small part of a legacy. peak performance. There's accolades, there's pivotal moments, and surely there's degree of difficulty. And it's almost as if this comparison, this conversation's like if LeBron and MJ played against each other and Jordan beat LeBron in the AC championship game or the conference finals, he beat him in the Super Bowl or the NBA finals. But with football, it's different. This is not a game where these two quarterbacks are facing head to head. So much of the sport drives on the other two layers in specials and defense. In a vacuum, what makes Tom Brady the GOAT is the longevity, playing for over 20 years, 20 in New England, an extra 3 in Tampa Bay, and having some of his best years after the age of 40. And for Patrick Mahomes to get to that level, he's going to have to be an all-pro for 15 seasons. Brady's got 7 Super Bowls, and the thing is, he's got more Super Bowls than any one team. So I feel like for Mahomes this year, he would have to win a 3rd Super Bowl because with Andy Reid in the second half, the later stages of his coaching career, you can't take for granted the supporting cast that Patrick stepped into. With Brady, he spent his entire New England tenure filling in for Drew Bledsoe, and he gets Bill Belichick, monster defenses. For a small period of time, he had Randy Moss. When they moved on from Moss, they had Gronk, Aaron Hernandez, filthy running games, loaded offensive lines of Pro Bowlers. Even though he didn't have the premier outside wide receiver, he had the likes of Julian Edelman going all the way back to Wes Welker. With Mahomes, he may not get that same consistency in his supporting cast. And in order for him to become the GOAT, he has to get 5 Super Bowls, I think. That would be the type of barometer, more than Montana, more than a Bradshaw who has, the most, or he had the most. That's the type of company he needs to enter. And then you can make the case with him being a more gifted thrower, a more talented out of structure playmaker, an equally adept killer in structure. That's when you can say he's the GOAT. But I think the barometer would be, 15 All Pros, a 4th MVP, and a 5th Super Bowl ring. Right now he's only at 2, which is a pretty high bar. Like I said with Andy Reid, we don't know how much longer he, on the wrong side of 60, he is going to be the Kansas City Chiefs coach. And beyond Patrick, what makes the Chiefs so great in the conversation of a dynasty is that they are the best coach team in football as Bags and Andy Reid. And that's the biggest thing to me that's going to go outside of Mahomes and his control.
Maybe I'm in the minority here, but I don't think the head-to-head matchups between Mahomes and Brady should discount Mahomes from ever being the GOAT.
I agree. Without doubt.
And I say that because, the first matchup, D Ford offsides, it was a big reason why the Patriots won that first matchup.
Mm-hmm.
The Chiefs had one of the worst defenses in football, and they still made it to the AFC Championship game. Exactly. And then in the Super Bowl, when the Chiefs played Tampa Bay, it was just a better team. Tampa Bay was a better team. Mahomes' entire offensive line was out, and it was really just a bad offensive line. And that's when Brett Veach decided to just go all in on the line and help Mahomes in that way. I think you make an excellent point about the supporting cast because, there's no denying that Brady had a great supporting cast. Mahomes has a great supporting cast. And that can kind of get overlooked because of the greatness of Mahomes and Kelsey and Andy Reid. I think someone who doesn't get enough credit in these discussions is someone like Steve Spagnuolo, who he's in the perfect role of a defensive coordinator that probably will never be a head coach. So you never have to worry about him leaving, at least a head coach again, because he had one stint. So you don't have to worry about him leaving. He's fine being a coordinator. That's where he's best at. And he has some great moments outside of the Chiefs as well. Like, the 2007 Patriots with the Giants being the coordinator for that team. Steve Spagnuolo has proven himself in multiple different stops, and the Chiefs lucking into him. It's been a big reason why their defense the last couple of seasons, either throughout the entire year, late in the season, they have played at a high level.
Mm-hmm. No, without a doubt. And that's where it becomes tough to differentiate what to expect from Pat long term.
The thing that scares me about the Ravens is that the Ravens are a team that historically they can step up to the plate. They did it in the early 2000s with the dominant defense. They did it with Joe Flacco with a dominant defense. And now they have Lamar Jackson and a dominant defense. They aren't a cursed franchise like the Bills is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the Chiefs against the Bills, they ran 43 plays for 360.
This is not going to come down to Brady beating Mahomes in the Super Bowl. So much of this is dependent on outside factors, which is what makes the GOAT talk in the NFL really based off luck. We can be honest. A large part of this is due to stuff that the player cannot control. Whereas in basketball, a player can directly impact the outcome of the game by himself.
You're right. In football, there's a lot of context that you have to provide. But I mean, the context for Mahomes, let's just make it clear. The context for Mahomes is that before he started for the Chiefs, Alex Smith could not get consistent playoff wins out of them. Andy Reid was not a Super Bowl champion until Patrick Mahomes, where in New England with Tom Brady, Bill Belichick had already proven himself as a defensive mind in stints with the Giants, who they held the high-powered Buffalo Bills offense to a low-scoring game in the Super Bowl, and the Giants won that Super Bowl. With the Browns, they made the playoffs. And the Patriots, before Brady started full-time, they made a Super Bowl with Drew Bledsoe. So the Patriots were having some success. So I think that's the case for Mahomes. And that's why I don't agree with the notion that it's just the situation, because I think Mahomes was put in the right situation, but he's elevated that further than any quarterback I think could have elevated it. Now, Peyton Manning is someone who obviously is one of the best quarterbacks of all time. He's played 27 career playoff games. Mahomes has 16. Manning has one more career playoff win, even though he's played 11 more playoff games. And Manning has 2 more playoff touchdowns and 440 more attempts. I understand Payne has a longevity, but when I have made the statement before that Mahomes is better than Peyton Manning, I mean, Mahomes has accomplished so much more in a short amount of time. I mean, that's my argument for Mahomes over Manning.
No, without a doubt. Manning is known as the best regular season quarterback, but then Mahomes in his first year had one of the best regular seasons we've seen. And every single year we see him do it in a different way with a different supporting cast. Mahomes, in terms of the regular season, is top 3 of all time, top 4 with Rodgers, Brady, Manning, and then you can put Drew Brees in there as that 5th member. So I think this is the year, a 3rd Super Bowl, same amount as Peyton. Then you start to look at him as a true, you can't debate it. This is a top 3, top 4 quarterback.
And finish with 2.
Peyton won 2, exactly. So my apologies. When looking at Aaron Rodgers, who won 1, and Peyton, who won 2, that's where you can lump Mahomes with 3 Super Bowls into that top 4 mix, into the top 4, like definite mix. Someone you can shoe in.
Mahomes, 4th most playoff wins, highest completion percentage in the playoffs, highest quarterback rating, 9th most passing yards in the playoffs, 6th most passing touchdowns, lowest interception percentage in the playoffs at 1.2%, 3rd most yards per game passing in the playoffs at 285.1, 16 playoff games, 13-3. And in his last 3 playoff games, he's thrown 0 interceptions and he's taken 0 sacks. So these last 3 games against the Bills, the Dolphins, and in the Super Bowl against the Eagles, one of the best defensive lines all season, taking 0 sacks and having no turnovers. I mean, that's going to be the Chiefs' recipe to win this year, because they don't have an explosive offense. And we probably are having this conversation a little bit too prematurely, even though Mahomes has to accomplish a lot, because there's still a monster they have to get past, and that's the Baltimore Ravens. And I don't want to look past them because they're an awesome team. This year, Lamar Jackson's point differential is 145 against playoff teams. He's 7-2. So this is going to be a tall task for the Chiefs. And I think if the Chiefs can beat the Ravens, it just kind of cements Mahomes even more, because I think the Ravens are a better team.
Yeah, I would agree with you altogether. And the coaching staff is probably on the same exact level. So what you just said before, they're a plus 145 against winning teams. That basically means on average, they beat each good team by multiple scores every single week. And this is the one team that the Ravens haven't routed, basically, in this premier group, them and the Bills, the Chiefs and the Bills. It's also important to remember, too, Brady won 7 Super Bowls. He played in 10.
Yeah.
So Mahomes is playing 3. And we're like, he's already 28 years old. Beyond the coaching and the supporting cast, a large part of it is health. Outside of Brady's torn ACL in the year Matt Castle played and they missed the playoffs with a 11-win season, 10s, he was one of the most durable players, and he consistently played through injuries, like his first Super Bowl at the Buccaneers, whether it was thumb, his knee. And Mahomes has done that, but can he do that 35 and 40 consistently? That's another layer, which is totally luck dependent.
It's just not often that you see a player win and then also have the stats to back up their case. When Brady was playing from 2001 to 2006, the best quarterback was Peyton Manning. A lot of people viewed him as the best quarterback, not Tom Brady. Tom Brady had the winning. He just didn't have the stats. Aaron Rodgers, for a long time, him and Brady was a debate because Rodgers was more talented, but Brady won more. And you look at the defenses that Brady has had, he's had far better defenses. But this is a case where like Mahomes has every single stat advantage, and then he also has the winning. And if he keeps on winning, he's going to have every advantage possible
Mhm.
in conference championship games. This makes me feel much better about the Ravens matchup. Mahomes has the best touchdown to interception ratio in the history of the game. 7-1 touchdown interception ratio. The only closest player to him that's a quarterback, well, the only closest quarterback to him is Drew Brees at 3.5 touchdowns to interception ratio. That's number two. So Mahomes in conference championship games is double that. And in the conference championship, Mahomes has thrown 14 touchdowns to 2 interceptions, and Brady is 21 touchdowns to 17 interceptions. So, like with the stats, I mean, they clearly favor one guy. That's why, to me, it's pretty clear, who I think the best quarterback I've seen play is. I think it's Mahomes. But then when you get into the accolades and accomplished conversation, that's when you have to bring in Brady. But there's no doubt in my mind Mahomes is the best I've seen.
My question is, how much is the numbers, how much is the data or the production of these two quarterbacks skewed by the era they played in? Because Mahomes came 17 years later.
I think it has something to do with it, not everything to do with it, because Brady was after Marino's time, and Marino had eye-popping stats for his time in the era he played in. Peyton Manning had numbers that were far better than Brady's. And in the regular season, Brady was not a top three-ish quarterback. He didn't perform to that level. But I do understand your point. I mean, numbers can skew things because a quarterback that is not even a top 10 quarterback in the NFL currently
Mhm.
will have better numbers than Brady did in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Let's throw a quarterback out there like what Geno Smith just did, the
Mhm.
last 2 seasons. If you compare his numbers to like a 2-season stretch of Brady in the early 2000s, it's going to look very similar. But that also brings up another intriguing point, John. And the intriguing point is that Mahomes is doing this in a loaded quarterback era, in a quarterback era that is filled with superstar players. And I know Brady played in the AFC with Pam Manning and Ben Roethlisberger
Philip,
and Philip Rivers. He played with some amazing
Luck.
quarterbacks as well, Andrew Luck. But I think the quarterbacks in this era are better. And unlike the LeBron thing in the NBA, where LeBron was going through teams in the East that was weak, that was a
Mhm.
common
Right.
knock on him, that the Eastern Conference was the weaker conference. If Mahomes played in the NFC, that could be used against him. But the fact that he's playing in the toughest conference with the toughest quarterbacks, and he's slaying the likes of Josh Allen, uh,
Joe
Joe
Burrow,
Burrow.
sometimes, not always.
I mean, that is the argument for Mahomes that I think it
Mhm.
makes his resume much better because he's going up against the best of the best.
Without a doubt. I mean, Justin Herbert every single year puts up numbers that are almost like 2013 to 15 Tom Brady. And yet Herbert seldomly has he even beaten Mahomes is the question I have. A large part of it, though, was in that Brady era, he was doing the same exact thing in a way more difficult quarterback environment because every single time he went to the postseason, if he wasn't playing a premier quarterback, he was playing Joe Flacco and the Ravens defense with 5 All-Pros, or he was playing Ben Roethlisberger with the Steelers 4 All-Pros on defense or 3 All-Pros on defense. So I would say in both their cases, it's only raised by the degree of difficulty in the playoff runs, specifically those Raven and Steeler teams, because that was who he had to beat just to get to Peyton Manning in the next round.
The thing that scares me about the Ravens is that the Ravens are a team that historically they can step up to the plate. I mean, they did it in the early 2000s with the dominant defense. They did it with Joe Flacco with a dominant defense. And now they have Lamar Jackson and a dominant defense. They aren't a cursed franchise like the Bills, is what I'm trying to say.
Mhm. Right.
And the Chiefs against the Bills, they ran 43 plays for 364 yards. That's 8.46 yards per play. It's the highest yards per play any Chiefs team has had in the Mahomes playoff era. The previous high was 7.6 yards per play versus Houston in 2019 and Buffalo in 2021. And they also held Josh Allen to 0 plays of 20 plus yards. So Steve Spagnuolo put on a masterclass. But I say all that to say the Bills are very much a cursed franchise. To tie the game up against the Chiefs, Tyler Bass misses a field goal. It goes wide right. Josh Allen before that misses a touchdown pass because Chris Jones pushed Deion Dawkins into him and threw him off platform a bit. The Bills are always this close, but they can never get it done. And now we're heading into an era for the Bills that Josh Allen's cap hit in 2024 is 47.1 million. The previous 5 seasons, it's been under 18 million. You look at the free agents: Micah Hyde, Daquan Jones, Leonard Floyd, Tim Settle, Jordan Phillips, Gabe Davis, Tyrell Goodson, AJ Epinesa, Linville Joseph, Shaq Lawson, Dane Jackson. Razul Douglas has a high cap hit of 9 million. They just traded for him. Do they cut him to save some money? Who knows? Von Miller is still under contract on this team, and that was an awful contract when they gave it to him. Who knows how they're going to get out of that? But it feels like even with Josh Allen at quarterback, even with one of the best quarterbacks we've seen of the era, they're going to be stuck, and it's going to be really hard to build around him if they don't hit on almost every single draft pick moving forward.
And that's the only way, because as you highlighted, a lot of their premier players are guys who have been injured and are making a boatload of money. Von Miller's one, Tre'Davious White's another one, where they have a career-altering injury at or near 30 years old, and they don't come back the same player. And this is what we saw this year. Matt Milano, who is one of those superstar linebackers we've seen. And I think I don't believe in a franchise being cursed necessarily, but a large part of their misfortune has been the injuries in the defense. And specifically, I think the Bills' biggest issue is that they don't have the pass rushing depth when a guy like Von Miller goes down or is being benched. This year in the draft, their needs: edge rusher, wide receiver, more on the interior defensive line probably, or more on the interior offensive line, and then more on the interior defensive line, because as you laid out, a guy like Daquan Jones is kind of like the heart of that group. He is a free agent, and they have negative $46 million in cap space this all season, which means their general manager has to get creative, making small, under-the-radar moves like acquiring Razul Douglas. He can't solve their problems making more blockbuster moves because they already showed their hand 2 years ago when they signed Von and they made these big moves. One guy I like a lot for them, Xavier Worthy, that just a burner that could replace Gabe Davis for less money. They have a lot of very talented players in the offense, most notably James Cook, Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakir. But beyond all of those very good players in the roles is Stephon Diggs turned 30 years old, and when Joe Brady came in, he did not play the same role. He didn't play much of an emphasis, and in the playoffs, he didn't play well. And you can't really cut him because you're going to be taking more on a dead cap than you are, the savings. So what do you do to replace Stephon Diggs if he is no longer an elite receiver? I do want to say yesterday was a bad look for the Diggs made Josh Allen camp, to get that out of the way. But Josh Allen still needs an elite wide receiver, just like every other quarterback in the AFC. Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, even Keenan Allen this year. Every single one needs a premier player. But it's not like they can solve their problems by just acquiring Devontae Adams and taking on that contract or signing to Mike Evans, unless you're getting a big name player to retire, which is going to open up another void on your roster. So the idea with the Bills is that their window was probably 2 years ago in 2021. And the last couple of years, the injuries, the one misplay, and the one coordinator change that maybe could have came a little bit earlier, all of these little factors have added on. And yeah, I think they have kind of missed their window here, it feels like.
It was always dumb to think that Stephon Diggs made Josh Allen. Any
Oh, yeah.
quarterback's numbers are going to improve with an elite option. But Joe Brady coming in and everybody else being utilized and Stephon Diggs not having the monster numbers, yet Josh Allen still playing at a high level, kind of put that theory to bed. And I don't think this is the worst thing in the world for the Bills, because if they find a way to move on from Stephon Diggs, I think the Packers showcased that maybe if you have 5, 6 guys that are really good, but you don't have that great guy, you can still have a very successful offense if you have the right quarterback to distribute the ball to all of them. So the Bills could maybe take on that type of approach, I think, to save money moving forward. That's probably the way they're going to have to go. But Stephon Diggs has disappeared, and Josh Allen, for all the hate that he's caught, because I love Josh Allen. I love watching him play. He's one of my favorite players to play. When he's at his best, I mean, he's as close to Mahomes as anybody can get. And coming into this season, because he was coming off that loss to the Bengals in the playoffs, Stephon Diggs yelled at him at the sideline. That created a lot of tension. That created a lot of narratives around Josh Allen that he was an overrated player. He was a turnover machine. Yet in these playoffs that we just saw, he had 0 turnovers in the playoffs. He kept care. He took care of the ball. And in the regular season, when you look at the turnovers that he's had, and you don't just look at the raw numbers, you look at how they happen. The turnovers are often low risk turnovers. They don't come in important moments. They come on third and long situations when it's an arm punt, or sometimes he's a little bit too overconfident in his arm. But really, those turnovers aren't boneheaded bad decisions. You kind of see where they're coming from. I was reading an article from Ben Solak today called The Hot Read, and he wrote this tidbit on Josh Allen and the Bills. And I think that I seen this circulating on Bills Twitter, and a lot of Bills fans were heartbroken by these words. And he goes, I can't forget the great Allen plays. Nobody can. But Mahomes' highlights serve as bookmarks in the story of his career. They're tethered not just to a place and a time, but to a moment, an event, a victory. Allen's highlights are ghosts. They are lost to the gales of a bombarded franchise, swallowed up by the shadow of an unforgiving scoreboard. They matter so much. They're the only things that hope clings to in Buffalo, but they don't matter at all.
He's 100% right. And that's the saddest part. A lot of people have been floating around 2010 quarterbacks and 2020 quarterbacks to draw a comparison. They say Josh Allen is Ben Roethlisberger. They say Josh Allen is Peyton Manning. At the end of the day, Josh Allen is Ben Roethlisberger in play style. He's Peyton Manning in explosiveness, whether it be in the regular season production or the playoff games where he levels up. And he's Phillip Rivers in fortune. That is the story of Josh Allen if you were to compare him to 3 quarterbacks.
I think you're spot on. Because in order to be Ben Roethlisberger, in order to be Peyton Manning, you got to have a championship. And his career might go down as Phillip Rivers-esque, where we know how talented he is. His counterparts in Eli Manning and Ben Roethlisberger went on to get rings, but he can never do it. And Josh Allen might be that quarterback in this era where you have Lamar Jackson having a great chance to do it this year, Mahomes doing it this year. And it does feel like for the greatness that Josh Allen brings to the football field, a lot of it is forgotten. And I think that was a lot of people coming into this year in the offseason with how they talked about Josh Allen. We forgot about how good this guy really was because he didn't win. And Mahomes in this era is kind of like Michael Jordan in his era. When you stop Charles Barkley from winning a championship, you stop Patrick Ewing from winning a championship, you stop Karl Malone and John Stockton from winning. They are viewed as the best players that never won a championship.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a category that Josh Allen can fall into, not a category of Payne or Ben Roethlisberger, but more so a category of Dan Marino.
Dan Marino is an even greater example because he was the best quarterback in the NFL for a certain year and a certain time. I just can't look at the Bills and say any of this falls on Josh. Small moments do, small fragments in time, but by and large, their issues have come because last year they're missing 7 defenders versus that Bengals team at home. This year, they have nobody down the field to make a play after 20 yards. How is that a possibility when Josh is landing a 75-yard bomb perfectly into his number 1 wide receiver's hands? And the run game came alive with Joe Brady because they went under center and get more explosive runs on the outside. But even versus the Chiefs and that defense, James Cook averaged under 4 yards a carry. And I can highlight they have a lot of good role players, but at the end of the day, special teams, defense, weapons, Josh is the last reason why they haven't won a Super Bowl. And it's really unfortunate to say such a thing.
And that's why someone like Gabe Davis was missed in this matchup, because while he's not an elite tier wide receiver, he's somebody that offers a vertical presence, and deep down the field, he can make plays. And I think that bomb that Allen threw that Diggs missed, that's a play that I think, big game Gabe, he might have come down with. He's a very physical receiver at high points and catches. So I disagree with you when you say the Bills franchise isn't cursed. because they've been knocked out by Mahomes 3 times in a row. And Mahomes is Mahomes. That's not a curse. But they lost 4 straight Super Bowls before. This season, having all the momentum in the world, winning 5 straight games to win the AFC East and then going into the playoffs, this was the weakest team the Chiefs were going to have in a while, because I think in the offseason, Brett Veach is going to address the receiver position like no other. This was your chance. And I think the Ravens know that this is their chance. That's why that matchup worries me a lot, because I trust the Ravens to come up and show up in the moment more than the Bills do, because historically that's what they've shown me.
Without a doubt. Well, this year that's what they've shown us, at least, because they've had everything come together at the perfect time. The Bills are not the only team to lose 4 Super Bowls and never win. The Vikings are the other team. So
In
I
a
think
row.
in a row, they're the only team. Yes. I just don't like to say a franchise is cursed personally. So maybe that's the reason why I won't say it. But you can say that.
There are things that are just undeniable, John. The Jets are a cursed franchise. We get Aaron Rodgers and he tears his Achilles the second play.
I
I mean,
agree
there
with
are
that.
things that happen to certain franchises that just don't happen to other ones. And it's inexplainable. I don't know why, but I think these curses are real for certain teams. And I don't know what it's going to take for them to get out of the funk. For the Chiefs, it was Mahomes, and he's the guy that just lifted all the curses. There are 2 coordinator hires that I think are interesting. The first one I want to get into, Ryan Nielson to the Jaguars. I think this is a home run hire. I think he was the best defensive coordinator out on the market outside of Avero on the Panthers, but I don't know if Avero's returning or not. Ryan Nielsen to the Jaguars. With the Falcons, he was 5th in defensive success rate, top 10 in both run and pass success rate. He comes from the Dennis Allen tree, a very physical style of playing defense, a lot of press coverage. And you look at how the Falcons played last year under Ryan Nielsen. They aligned in press coverage 53.7% of wide aligned routes. The 2023 Jags were at 16.7%. The top 5 press teams in the NFL: number 1, the Falcons; 2, the Chiefs; 3, the Saints; 4, the Bills; 5, the Ravens. So I think Ryan Nielsen is going to bring a sense of physicality to this cornerback room. They're going to be up in your face. They're going to throw off the timing of offenses. And I think going to the Jaguars now allows Ryan Nielsen to do a little bit more, because the Falcons defense last year was not this defense that had a ton of talent. They improved for sure, but for them to go from a bottom 10 defense to a top 10 defense was really a credit to the change in philosophy that he brought. And when Jacksonville, I mean, now you have 2 primetime edge rushers in Josh Allen, who I think they will sign back, and Trayvon Walker, who has been overshadowed by Aiden Hutchinson, but Trayvon wasn't this quote unquote wrong pick. I mean, he's been very successful in Jacksonville in his own right. And in Atlanta, you didn't have that. I mean, your edge rushers were Arnold Ebiketie, Lorenzo Carter. I mean, you didn't have that. Bud Dupree, who's coming off of injuries now, who's not the same, and Calais Campbell. Calais Campbell's a free agent, so that's something to look out for if maybe he returns with Ryan Nielsen in Jacksonville, and that could bring more depth to their defensive line. But, I mean, I think the personnel in Jacksonville is perfect for Nielsen to take advantage of.
Well said. Last year, Dean Pease, the Falcons gave up the 6th most yards in football. This year, the 11th least. And the Jaguars this year had some issues in offense, but they also had a lot of issues on defense too. Missed tackles, miscommunication back end. As you highlighted, they have a very talented group, specifically at edge and at cornerback with Tyson Campbell and Darius Williams. These are guys who have played key roles on playoff teams, have been some of the best players in terms of opponent completion percentage, pass deflections. A lot of it is coaching. And with the job he did, as you highlighted, coming from the Saints coaching tree, it seems like a very good hire here by Doug Peterson, who does have some questions around him. We saw in Philadelphia him win a Super Bowl. Frank Reich left, and the Eagles slowly but surely took a pretty big fall off, a pretty big step back, and eventually he was fired. In Jacksonville, he had his big year, his big moment, but how does he respond? Because his coaching staff last year held him back. I agree with you. This is one of the best hires they could possibly have, but I think more importantly is what they do with the play caller on offense.
I agree with that. To stick with the Ryan Nielsen point, I wrote down the position groups on the Falcons and Jaguars. I mentioned the edge rushers. The linebackers for the Falcons: Caden Ellis, Nate Landman. They played really good last season, well, this past season, but the Jaguars are more talented. Alua Khan is a good player. Devin Lloyd is talented, but hasn't lived up to his
Inconsistent.
potential. In the right scheme and system, he can be unlocked. So I'm looking forward to see how he plays. And you mentioned it. I mean, the Jaguars have talent in Tyson Campbell, Darius Williams, Andre Cisco, Rayshawn Jenkins. This is a team that they can turn around their defense. This is a defensive turnaround type of hire with Nielsen. It's really going to
Mhm.
bring a sense of physicality. They're going to blitz a lot. They're going to be in your face. And I think with having great edge rushers at his disposal, it just makes your back end that much better.
Right.
Another hire that happened was Shane Waldron to the Chicago Bears. I'm sorry, Bears fans. This is not for Justin Fields. Can we, John? I'm sick of this, man. Can we stop thinking that Fields is going to be back with the Bears?
It's possible to me, but maybe it's not possible to you.
You think it's possible?
Yes.
Give me a percentage of where you stand of the possibility that Justin Fields is the quarterback.
30%.
I think it's 0%, John. I think it's 0%. They have the first overall pick. They have a chance to select Caleb Williams or Drake May,
Mhm.
who are both better prospects than Justin Fields. It resets the rookie quarterback contract timeline for
I
the
agree.
Bears. It's an easy no-brainer question. And Shane Waldron, I think was brought in for whatever rookie quarterback they decide to take. I don't think Caleb is a slam dunk pick over Drake May. I
Mhm.
think Drake May is very talented and he's going to kind of go under the radar in this cycle. I'm actually curious to see how the draft cycle plays out because I would not be surprised if throughout the draft cycle, the buzz on Drake May starts to pick up a lot more than it has already. He really kind of feels like a sleeper pick to me right now. But
Right.
Caleb and Shane Waldron, he loves three wide receiver sets. Shane Waldron does. You saw the job he did with Geno Smith. He's somebody that has learned under Sean McVay and the Shanahan tree. He brings over those principles. Geno Smith had a great year, his first year starting with the Seahawks with Waldron calling plays. This year kind of had a down year, but I still thought he was solid. Now with the Bears, rookie quarterback who's very talented, DJ Moore. You draft a receiver in the first round, maybe sign one, or you're still hoping that Darnell Mooney is going to be a good player. I think the Bears are in a very good position to rebuild this team fast. And when you have a defensive minded head coach, you need to hire a good offensive coordinator. I still do have questions about how Waldron adjusts, but I feel like the biggest problem in Seattle this past season was the offensive line.
Right.
Geno Smith wasn't helped out with protection, and I think the Bears have better protection in place for whatever quarterback plays there next season.
I would agree. The Seahawks, their offensive line was so young to tackle, and they dealt with injuries. I didn't love this hire personally. The Seahawks offense has been average the last 3 years with really talented weapon groups. And with Waldron, the one thing that stuck out to me is that they weren't a good red zone offense at all. They ranked 26th in touchdown percentage. And I felt like the moment Dave Canales left the quarterback's coach who worked directly with Geno, you saw that offense take a step back with some misregression this last year. For the Bears, to me, this offensive coordinator hire is fine. And my worry with them, it may sound a bit misguided because quarterback matters more, but I really worry about the coaching here. The Matt Eberflus hire never made sense to me when your number one goal is developing Justin Fields, not the defense. I look at Matt Eberflus and why are they keeping him? A defensive turnaround, a resurrection of sorts after the trade deadline. But that's too focused in the results and not the actual process. With the head coaching candidates on the market, I felt the right thing to do this all season would be hiring an offensive mind. And with the defensive players you've gotten in place, you can find a Matt Eberflus as your DC. But as a head coach, it's a much less valuable commodity. I worry that Chicago here is making a huge mistake. And if they do pass up on the first overall pick and they roll Justin Fields and they roll with Matt Eberflus, I think Ryan Poles is setting himself short because these are opportunities they're not going to get in a year. So if Matt Eberflus struggles this next year and Shane Waldron's offense isn't necessarily taking it to that top 10 level of Justin Fields taking a year or four breakout, I feel like this coaching staff is the number one thing that's going to hold them back. Altogether, they have a talented roster, wide receiver, DB, edge rusher coming into place. They've put a lot of money into it. but I'm just not optimistic that these are the right types of guys to lead them into contention, especially with Matt LaFleur over there in Green Bay, getting a new DC. You can look at him getting someone like a Dennis Allen. He wasn't fired, but a good defensive mind. You look at the Lions with Dan Campbell, and then look at the Vikings with Kevin O'Connell. The Bears are the worst coaching in this division to me, and I think while the Justin Fields versus Caleb versus Drake May thing really does matter, I'm not really moved by this hire. I think if anything, Joel, if they were to take Caleb Williams in this year's draft, I would go with Cliff Kingsbury to run their air raid offense. And I feel like with Waldron, it's an all right hire, but it may not be best for the quarterback they do choose.
Well, I think the problem with Cliff Kingsbury is that he's not somebody that's going to be under center a whole lot. And that's going to put more stress on your quarterback to
Right.
kind of make the perfect play. And I thought Collar was talented enough to get away with it. But Cliff down the stretch in Arizona really showcased that he wasn't helping his quarterback. I think Shane Waldron has done some good things. I don't think he's the perfect offense coordinator hire, but I thought he was a good one. He's better than Luke Getsy. I do believe that they will draft a quarterback, but I agree with your assessment on the coach, the head coach, and Matt Eberflus, because in a head coaching cycle that is filled with top echelon coaches, Jim Harbaugh, Bill Belichick, Mike Vrabel,
Ben Johnson.
you are Ben Johnson. You are settling for somebody that might be fired a year from now. And that's why I think they're going to draft a quarterback, because if they keep Justin Fields and a leap doesn't happen, Eberflus is gone. If they draft Caleb Williams or Drake May and they have a fantastic rookie season, Eberflus is going to buy himself another year in Chicago. So this is very much about job security for the head coach and Matt Eberflus. And you might say that's the wrong way to go about things, but it's the politics of the sport.
Yeah.
You know, everybody's trying to keep their job. But I do think the Bears made a mistake by sticking with him because the defensive turnaround was nice. But am I counting on the Bears to come into next season and be one of the top end defenses? I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't think they played enough high level offenses for me to buy the second half of the season resurrection from their defense, especially week 18 when the Packers moved the ball on them left and right, and it was pretty easy. They moved up and down the field with little to no restriction. The points may have not showed it on the final score, but the yardage did, and they had a lot of success on offense. So I think if anything, Matt Eberflus is like the long-term piece that's holding this team back as a whole.
Right.
But this is a step in the right direction if you keep Matt Eberflus, because now you at least get somebody who has shown and had success running an offense with another quarterback.
That's true. I mean, he's an experienced play caller at the very least. And if Luke Getsy, he wasn't that coming in. And the reason the Bears didn't make a playoff push or a strong enough one was because of their dismal start those first few weeks versus the Packers, when it was the least organized offense in football, 32nd least organized. And that was the number one thing that made you say, okay, Luke Getsy's not this upcoming head coach. They need to find a replacement. And at the very least, Waldron will be a real upgrade.
Talking about great head coaches on the market, the Atlanta Falcons have interviewed two of them, Jim Harbaugh and Bill Belichick. I think it's going to be Bill Belichick. I think that's the hire, and I think the hire for the Chargers is going to be Jim Harbaugh. I think Jim Harbaugh is in love with Justin Herbert, and I think Bill Belichick wants a challenge. He wants to go to an organization where he can build it up and get credit for it. Because even though he shouldn't get less credit for the Patriots dynasty.
Yeah.
He should get a lot of credit for that because of how Brady left and won a championship with Tampa Bay. His legacy and what he brought to the table is now in question. And I think if Bill Belichick would have went to a team like Philadelphia or Dallas, then it kind of would have put him in a lens of like Kevin Durant going to Golden State. You're just front running. You're going to the most talented team, and now we expect the championship. The Falcons is a very strategic move because it's a division where you're going to be seeing Baker Mayfield, Bryce Young, and Derek Carr. I mean, I think Bill Belichick is looking at those quarterbacks like, oh my God, this is 5 wins a year against these quarterbacks. I'm going to have them in a frenzy. They're not going to be able to do anything against my defense. The Falcons defense with Ryan Nielsen was top 10. So with Bill Belichick and a draft where he brings in better defensive players, it could be even better. And I think he's not held back by the drafts like he was in New England with offense, because the pieces offensively are here. You have Kyle
Well,
Pitts, you have Drake London, you have Bijan Robinson, and Bill Belichick loves his two running backs. So you also have Tyler Algier.
mm,
The quarterback is the question. It can either be the 8th overall pick, they can move up or stay there and get a quarterback. But I think another perfect player would kind of be like a Kirk Cousins. If Kirk Cousins goes to the Atlanta Falcons and they just sign him and Bill Belichick has the offensive pieces in place, the offensive line, he's taking care of the defense. I mean, this team can win the division, but I think they could do even more than that, honestly.
look, I love Bill Belichick taking his defense. We saw them take a huge step forward with Jesse Bates coming in last year, and they've got some really damn good defensive backs. But the number one question with the Falcons is quarterback. And when watching how Bill Belichick handled Mac Jones, I don't really have much faith in him with the 8th overall pick taking a Jaden Daniels or a JJ McCarthy. With Jim Harbaugh, if he goes to the Falcons, he's taking JJ McCarthy. But I think for Atlanta,
Oh my
they
God.
need to get the best possible offensive mind to maximize these weapons. If Belichick comes, probably will hire Josh McDaniels most likely. Same way if Mike Vrabel come, most likely hire Dennis. He would have most likely hired Arthur Smith and would have been probably the most ironic coordinator hiring of all time. Belichick is good, Joel. But with the way the NFL is trending, I think the best candidate would not be Harbaugh, not be Belichick. I think it would be Ben Johnson because that is somebody you trust to get the absolute most out of Kyle Pitts with his background working with tight ends specifically. For Atlanta, the defense is going to be above average. It's going to be solid and not something that really holds them back. But the question is, who is going to utilize these weapons with dynamic route concepts, stacking off one another, and then developing a quarterback if he's got Desmond Ridder or another bridge quarterback? I look at Kirk Cousins at 35, coming off a torn Achilles. You have to give him a contract more than 1 year. And this Falcons pass blocking unit was not good last year. It's not the same as Christian Darrisaw and O'Neal over there in Minnesota. If you were to hire a Bill Belichick and you get Kirk Cousins, you're not solving any solution. You're not finding any solution at quarterback. You're just extending the question another year down the road. So to me, I think the best thing for their future would have to be going with the younger offensive mind who's never been a head coach before. But I'm okay with that because at the end of the day, when you get the unknown head coach, but he's an offensive mind and he hits, you're never going to have to worry about him leaving. With Belichick, you have to acknowledge he did turn 71 years old. With Ben Johnson, he's not even 40 yet. I would take the risk knowing the reward is a lot greater.
Ben Johnson is excellent, and he's going to be a head coach. There's no doubt about that. I'm tired of hearing this notion that Jim Harbaugh is drafting JJ McCarthy. You've been saying it. I've heard it from other people. It's not happening, John. You know, Jim Harbaugh coached Josh Johnson in college, right? And Jim Harbaugh never brought Josh Johnson to one of his teams. JJ McCarthy is fine. He's not. Jim Harbaugh is smarter than drafting him in the first round. Let's be real, John.
In the top 10, I would hope so.
In the top 10, he's nowhere near a top 10 pick. Jim Harbaugh would not draft JJ McCarthy with the 8th overall pick. I can promise you that. I can promise you
40th?
that won't happen. Maybe in the 3rd round. That's like second round, late second. That's where he goes
all over again.
Listen, this is what I'm gonna tell you. I think you're underestimating Bill Belichick, and I think you're underestimating Bill Belichick because he also did draft Mac Jones. So he's shown the willingness to draft a quarterback before, and it was the 15th overall pick. So I wouldn't be surprised if on the 8th overall pick they draft someone like Jaden Daniels, who has a lot of upside and potential. But his best offensive coordinator historically has always been Josh McDaniels.
Yeah.
Josh McDaniels left Bill Belichick after a successful rookie year with Mac Jones because he got a head coaching opportunity with the Raiders, and Dave Ziegler and him both teamed up and followed suit to run the Raiders organization. But after 2 failed stints at head coach, Josh McDaniels is not going to be a head coach again. He's now in that realm of he will be an offensive coordinator for a very long time, which means that Bill Belichick can bring on Josh McDaniels. He doesn't have to worry about him leaving. And if you have a Falcons team with Bill Belichick, McDaniels, a rookie quarterback who McDaniels has shown can work with rookie quarterbacks before, or even if you bring in a veteran like Ryan Tannehill, it doesn't even have to be Kirk Cousins. In the AFC South specifically, John, with Bill Belichick running the Falcons, I have no doubt that they would be better than Carolina. They would be better than New Orleans, who they're in cap hell. They're only getting older and
Yeah.
worse, and they have a coaching issue as well. And then you look at the Buccaneers. This was an awesome season, but Baker Mayfield has to show it again. And that also is a team that is restricted by the amount of money that they've allocated to their team, and it's an older team. So the Falcons right now have a chance in this window to win the AFC South for multiple years on end. I think if they do things the right way, they can win this division for the next 2 to 3 years. And if you have a quarterback that is just good enough with an elite defense and an offense that can run the football in the NFC, which is a weak conference, you can make a deep playoff run.
Deep playoff run is strong if they're going to sign a Jimmy Garoppolo or they're going to acquire a Ryan Tannehill. Because I feel like when you're in a very crappy division, it's easy to call it just winning the thing when you're not actually taking the steps to becoming a contender, right? The Saints signed Derek Carr so that they could win the division, and how'd that go? The Panthers traded a lot to get Bryce Young to win the division. The Falcons' process should be on developing a quarterback to being a superstar. And maybe I'm too caught up in Josh McDaniels being stuck in his New England roots. Maybe I'm stuck with him having the impression of him wanting to bring Jimmy Garoppolo. The way they didn't want to go up and get a quarterback in Las Vegas, he wanted a guy from New England. I feel like with Belichick and McDaniels, it's a very solid foundation, and it's going to clearly be better than what you had previously. But you can go for something that's going to be geared toward 2025 and not 2015. I feel like New England is still stuck in trying to replicate the past with Tom Brady, but they're not going to evolve with the times to maximize the future of a franchise.
But the thing in New England, what held New England back was the weapons. And in Atlanta, you have Drake London and Kyle Pitts. So you have two pillars of an offense that can make your offense elevate. And we just saw the Buccaneers win a playoff game. We just saw the Lions are going to the NFC Championship game. If Kirk Cousins hadn't gotten hurt this year, with the Vikings being a top 10 defense and their offense being top 10 like it was,
Yeah.
I don't think it's out of the question that the Vikings could have been an NFC Championship team either.
I agree.
And I think the Falcons, if they bring in a serviceable quarterback with the talent that's on the team and great coaching, they can make a run in the NFC. I mean, if this hypothetical Falcons team that I'm talking about,
right,
could they have beaten the Cowboys? Yeah, probably. Like what we saw from the Cowboys. Could they have beaten the Eagles? Yeah, probably. Could they have beaten the Bucks? I mean, the NFC is so wide open that you can make a deep playoff run. The question is whether you're going to knock off a juggernaut like the 49ers, really. But
right.
I think, yeah, I think the Falcons are in a great place, and Bill Belichick would be a great hire. You know, I'm not going to stand for this Bill Belichick disrespect. If you get the right quarterback, you can be going. You could be flowing.
We've never seen Bill Belichick develop a quarterback after Brady. And that's the
He didn't need to.
Because he had Brady for 20 years.
Yes.
But a lot can
change. He developed Brady.
And with Josh McDaniels as well, it is a question if they can maximize one. And you're right. The NFC is wide open. After you get past the 49ers, anybody can be 2 through 4, it feels like. But at the end of the day, you need to have somebody who can maximize quarterback into becoming a Kirk Cousins, who's a top 10 caliber quarterback, who can find himself in the MVP race. And I'm always going to have the impression with a CEO head coach who has his own vision of how to win 7 years ago, 5 years ago, he's going to continue to try to replicate that model. But it may not be able to be replicated without that established premier quarterback. You're probably not going to get another Tom Brady, which means you have to develop one. And with their draft position with the 8th overall pick, I don't know if this is the right team, the right offense. They're going to be run first. It's going to fit well for Bijan. They could probably activate Kyle Pitts, but are they going to maximize the entire group? I feel like a Ben Johnson, with the love that he's gotten from every coach that he's worked with, whether it's Zach Taylor, who was on the Bengals, Joe Philbin, Ben Johnson's the type of offensive mind that people just want to hire no matter what. He's somebody that you want to work with. I think Ben Johnson is going to be somebody that gets a good DC. And as an offensive mind, maybe he's not the best rah-rah personality. But if he's going to maximize your weapons, you're going to win a lot more games. And if you win a lot more games, you're probably never going to lose this guy to another team. I'm just under the impression Bill Belichick would be the second best hire for Atlanta. It would be good. It'd be better than a lot of different options out there. But I think after interviewing Ben Johnson, that hire would take this team to the next level. It's the best fit for both sides.
So I have a question for you, John, because you said, Belichick has only developed Brady. He hasn't developed a quarterback after that. But
Mhm.
when you develop the greatest of all time, is that not good enough? Like, why do you need to prove that you can do it again?
It's a great question, but you would have to prove it again because the NFL has changed so much in the last 2 decades.
With Sean McVay, he developed Jared Goff, right? He didn't develop Stafford. He traded for Stafford, and that's what got them over the hump. So you don't always need to develop a guy, is what I'm saying. And we have to also take into consideration that when Brady tore his ACL, Matt Castle had a very good year. Matt Castle got paid because of that season and then became the quarterback for the Chiefs. Mac Jones, as a rookie, played really well.
Mhm.
And I think Mac Jones is a very limited physically, he's limited as a quarterback.
Yeah.
So if you can find a quarterback that has more traits that you can mold, then I think that's fine. And that's why I don't want to discredit Belichick for just developing Brady, because
Mhm.
developing Brady is the biggest accomplishment that there should be.
Right. You're right. But to me, the season you had Mac Jones, that was not gonna be replicated. And it does seem like in many different ways that Belichick wants to win the hard way. With a quarterback that's good but not great, so he can get more of the credit. With Tom Brady, it was split. And with Bill, he's trying to challenge himself to winning with more difficulty. But in this NFL, it's even more valuable, even more necessary to have that superstar quarterback. And yeah, you can acquire Matthew Stafford, but which elite quarterback is going to be on the trade block for them to acquire? Kyler, he's got that massive contract. And that's the only guy I could really see being a true franchise lifter. Otherwise, you're going to have to draft and develop that QB. And also, too, with Bill O'Brien last year, this Patriots offense was just as bad. And O'Brien was a very good coach in Houston. He helped develop Deshaun Watson. So I worry that this Patriots philosophy, even with a good offensive mind, a qualified play caller, it may not work for the modern NFL.
We'll have to see the hire that he makes a coordinator. I do think the Patriots' failures, while a lot of it does get put on Bill Belichick because he was the one that was stubborn to bring in Patricia and Joe Judge, and he ruined the development of Mac Jones, in my opinion. I feel like
I would agree.
they just don't have talent. Like, the Patriots just don't have talent, and that's why I think the Falcon situation is a bit different, because you have talented offensive players that Bill doesn't have to worry about now drafting.
Yeah.
With the Patriots, he had to worry about drafting that. That's why he whiffed on N'Keal Harry. That's why he whiffed on Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Aguilar in free agency and Juju in free agency. I thought Hunter Henry, he was actually pretty productive for them. I thought that was a
Kendrick
pretty good
Bourne was
hit.
a good one.
Yeah, and Demario Douglas in the later rounds, I thought he was pretty solid. You could argue he was the better Patriots receiver out of everybody this past season. Letting Jacoby Myers walk, I mean, those were mistakes, right? But I think if the offensive weapons are already in place, that's when I trust Bill Belichick that much more. I wouldn't trust him with a brand new offensive infrastructure that he
Right.
has to build by himself. But if a lot of the pieces are already there,
Mhm.
I'm comfortable with it.
And especially in the defensive ends, he's going to have AJ Terrell, Jesse Bates,
Yes.
developing edge rushers, good interior defensive line. There's already a lot for him to work with. And with Belichick, maybe he hasn't kept the same staff. A lot of them are staying in New England and Rob Mayo. But that could be a top 5 defense. And with the weapons, as you highlighted, I can definitely see Kyle Pitts breaking out if they keep him, because we've seen with the Josh McDaniels offense how much opens up the play action. So in many ways, it's going to make them a playoff team. All things considered, it's not something that should be kind of hated on. I'm presenting the Ben Johnson case, but at the end of the day, Belichick will be pretty darn good. And Atlanta's one of the best places for him to go, all things considered.
I think Mike McCarthy and Sirianni should have been fired. After their embarrassing playoff performances, they should have been gone. But between the two, I think the Eagles keeping Sirianni was a bigger mistake, all things considered. And I think Sirianni was a bigger mistake
Huh?
because the reason Hurts broke out was because of Shane Steichen, John. This year, Nick Sirianni promotes Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson was a complete disaster as an offensive play caller. They couldn't even handle blitz looks. It was embarrassing. There are high school football teams that can handle a blitz better than that. You can blame it on the coordinator, but ultimately Sirianni got hired because of what he did with Indianapolis when Phillip Rivers was a quarterback there with Frank Reich, where Frank Reich called the plays, but Sirianni designed the offense.
Right.
If, as an offensive coach, you see your offense struggling, at that point, that's when you have to step in and you have to take control. Sirianni never did that. The defense was an even bigger disaster when they moved to Matt Patricia and they left Sean Desai out to dry. That was a Sirianni decision. This team was far too talented to go out like how they went out. You can argue the same thing for the Cowboys, but here's the case for the Cowboys and Mike McCarthy. Dak Prescott had his best season of his career with Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy called plays. You can argue that the biggest reason the Cowboys flamed out in the playoffs was because Dan Quinn couldn't stop a nosebleed. His defense got torched left and right. The offense came out as flat as you can. Prescott, 2 interceptions. It led to a 14-point swing. He had a very big part in that. So there's blame to go all around. But at least Prescott had the best season of his career with McCarthy. And with Sirianni, Hurts had his best year because of Shane Steichen, not because of Sirianni.
You're right. So first off, I totally disagree. Mike McCarthy, far and away, the bigger mistake to hold on to because of expectations. Sirianni's first years with the Eagles, they exceeded them. 29 games going to the playoffs. Not many people thought they're making the playoffs that year. You were one of them. And I agreed. I'm like, this is a good offensive line. This is a team that can win 9 games. No one else thought that. The second year, they won 14 games, a 5-win improvement because of those coordinators. If Sirianni was able to hire them, and he had 1 year where he hired the worst 2 possible ones, he deserves another opportunity. That, to me, comes down to Sirianni as the locker room personality doing a good job with this team. Howie Roseman probably could get a small slither of the blame, but with a great GM and Sirianni, I would say 1 more year be reasonable to see if he can make the right hire. With Mike McCarthy, we've watched this Cowboy team lose 2 separate home playoff games in embarrassing fashion. And with Mike, it's true in the regular season, he's had a consistent resume, 3 straight seasons with 12 wins, but the expectation has always been 12 wins, and he has never once exceeded them. This year is his best work with the offense designing it, but nobody cared if he didn't win a playoff game. That was the only thing which mattered. And when you look at that playoff record, 1-3, you can put some of the blame on the GM for not giving them a good right tackle, not investing more into a short yardage back. But a lot of these positions are very smaller. When you've got 3 all-pro tackles, you add in Stephon Gilmore to make up for the loss of Diggs. You add in guys like Brandon Cooks and Jake Ferguson, really good players. At the end of the day in the playoffs, Dan Quinn's defense got torn to shreds, and Dak played poorly. If Dan Quinn now leaves, McCarthy's in a similar spot to Sirianni. His top assistant just left. He's probably not going to find somebody better. So if Dan Quinn's leaving, that's a huge loss to the Cowboys. He hasn't been a perfect defensive coordinator. In some ways, he can use Micah Parsons better, and he could surely have done a better job against that Packer team making adjustments at halftime. But Dan Quinn is the better of the 2 coaches here, and you're probably going to lose him. So I do agree with you. Sirianni deserves criticism. He could have done a way better job with that offensive coordinator hire because Brian Johnson was Matt Canada level bad. But when looking at the Cowboys coaching staff, Dan Quinn and Mike McCarthy, there's not much of a gap between those 2 head coaches. They're both solid, but they're always going to hold you back. They're always going to leave you wanting more.
Whoa, John. Dan Quinn is the better of the 2 coaches?
It's the same exact level.
Why?
You saw him in Atlanta with that defense get that team to a Super Bowl. He was a very solid head coach.
Okay.
Mike McCarthy is nothing more than solid.
What you just mentioned is fabrication. You fabricated, John. You lied.
Sure.
You lied because, and I feel like a lot of people feel this way too. When the Falcons made the Super Bowl, their offense was number 1. Kyle Shanahan carried them. That defense was the 28th ranked defense in the NFL, if I'm not mistaken. So that team that went to the Super Bowl, its defense was trash. Kyle Shanahan carried it, and that's why Kyle Shanahan got a head coaching job right after,
Yeah.
because he carried the offense. And then after Shanahan left, the offense, Matt Ryan kept it afloat for some years, but they really never had success after that to the level that they had it with Shanahan. So I don't agree. I think Dan Quinn was somebody that was masked by Kyle Shanahan in a lot of ways, because Shanahan was a coordinator there. Dan
Yeah.
Quinn, I think, is not a head coach, and that's why I was very worried about the Seahawks making him a head coach. We don't know if that's going to happen yet, but I
Right.
don't think he should be a head coach. I think he's too stuck in his ways and how he plays on defense, and that's why these better teams get the most of him. This year, the Cowboys had one of the easiest schedules in the NFL. I think they had like a top 3 easiest schedule in the NFL. That's why my hot take for next season, I'm starting early with the hot takes, John, is I think the Cowboys missed the playoffs. I think they're going to miss the playoffs. I think they're going to have a disaster season. They're going to have a first place schedule. Mike McCarthy, I don't trust him as a head coach that much. And I think maybe the MVP year by Dak was skewed a lot by teams that were not that good. So I think when you're facing better competition in a first place schedule and the Cowboys are losing those games, you can see maybe a possibility of a coaching firing in the middle of the season, or at least a team that is going to miss the playoffs. And now Mike McCarthy's not the coach after next year. I just don't know why you delay the inevitable. And I think with the Cowboys and the Eagles, the writing is on the wall for both coaches and both teams. Mike McCarthy's not going to get you over the hump. And Nick Sirianni isn't an offensive genius that's going to revive Jalen Hurts. And it's probably better if you go out and you search for somebody who has done it. So
Right.
I think both teams are delaying the inevitable. The McCarthy point is probably a little bit worse. Well, keeping McCarthy is probably a little bit worse because he's shown you before in a different situation it not end so well. But both are bad. Both are terrible.
On the Dan Quinn point, in the 2016 playoff run, they gave up in the regular season that year the 6th most points and also the 7th most yards. The year after Kyle Shanahan left in 2017, they had top 10 defense in yards allowed and also points allowed. And their offense fell to the middle of the pack. So Dan Quinn's defense was pretty inconsistent. But when looking at the work he did in Dallas and also factoring in the Atlanta years, I don't think there's a really any sort of gap between him and McCarthy
But the
because
work that Dan Quinn did in Dallas, the defense on paper looks great, but every year in the playoffs, it feels like they get figured out by offenses.
how about 2021 against the Niners?
When
Shutting
Jimmy
down Jimmy
Garoppolo was on the
Garoppolo on their
team,
offense, but their offense could not score a second touchdown.
listen, I think that's fair. I think you make a fair point.
That to me is the image of the Mike McCarthy era. The fact that you were within 3 points of being that Niner team and moving on to an NFC championship game. But at the end of the day, the offense could not take it a step forward with an offensive mind in McCarthy creating the offense, designing the offense. But you are right, though. Dan Quinn's run in Atlanta definitely falls a lot on Kyle Shanahan. And I will highlight with Nick Sirianni, there's definitely a fraud question in that playoff run, like a Zach Taylor level thing we had, and Taylor responded in that 2022 season by getting that Bengal team back at the AFC Championship game. Much like McCarthy, he could be gone in the middle of next year if that offensive coordinator hire is not very good. We've seen Jeffrey Lurie in the past fire Andy Reid and Doug Peterson, so we can be pretty confident he's not going to be too loyal here to the Sirianni either.
Make your prediction. Who do you think gets fired first?
Mike McCarthy.
Do you think Nick Sirianni gets fired after next year, or you think he proves himself?
I have a feeling that it can't be as worse as Brian Johnson, and it will only get better. That being said, I think it's a 50-50 chance he's gone at this time next year.
What are the odds that the Commanders hire Ben Johnson as a coach, draft Drake May with the 2nd overall pick, and they shock everybody and win the NFC East next year?
I could easily see it. They've got 4 picks in the top 40. They've got a lot of assets. The quarterback's going to be better. And their defense really can't be much worse than it was with Jack Del Rio and Ron Rivera. I mean, it was the most disappointing defense in football, right? So they can definitely next year be an 8-9 win team, and a surprising one if they get that level of an offensive mind.
I think that's my pick, John, next year. My early pick for worst to first, the Commanders.
Worst
Adam
to first,
Peters being there It moves me, and I think the defense does have talent. They're not devoid of talent.
Yeah.
So I think if they do bring in the right defense coordinator and they have the right scheme, it's not going to be awful. And if you have that offense with Drake May playing great as a rookie with McLaurin and Jahan and Curtis Samuel, I can see it. I can see it, John.
Specifically Terry McLaurin, because I think Jahan Dotson's overrated. But
We'll see. And that's going to wrap it up for the Joel Moran show here. Jam-packed show. I want to give a shout out to John for coming on and joining me on today's show, Monday, January 22nd. John, plug yourself.
You can follow me on YouTube, Instagram, or not Instagram, but mainly Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at John Tortorelli.
And make sure if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcast that you're following the podcast so you know when we upload a brand new episode. Make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.